Family finally found Book 1 After the Dust Settles, Chapter 2, Facing the Damage. Tails stood back as Tom and Maddie surveyed the damage to their home. He hadn't gotten a good look at it the other night. He was more focused on getting Sonic and hightailing it out of there. But now, in the light of day, he saw the true extent of the battle. It was worse than he thought. The entire back of the house had exploded outward, littering the yard with splintered wood and shattered glass. Another hole broke through the entryway wall, and the fence where he'd crashed through with the car gaped at him like a mouth with jagged teeth. He looked to his right and saw the remains of the shed where Knuckles had landed after the collision with the stolen police car. He winced. All of this destruction, all of this damage, all because of them. Knuckles stood in the middle of the yard, clutching the emerald. His face was unreadable, but Tails noticed how he shook his head at a charred blast patterned on the ground. Even the echidna seemed to feel guilty and remorseful at his role in the destruction of the property. The little fox kid wrapped his tails around himself, waiting for the inevitable moment when the adults decided he was too much trouble to keep.
Holy smokes.
Tom muttered, picking up his way through the rubble. It looked like a bomb had went off in the house. A full half of the back wall was just gone. The shed was destroyed, his lawnmower missing, and the fence was shattered. He looked down and saw the shattered remains of a black screen.
Aw, the TV.
He shook his head. Sonic had only been alone for just a few hours when Robotnik showed up. Sure, the kid was okay, but the what-ifs battered Tom's mind. What if Robotnik had upped his game and caught Sonic completely unaware? What if the guy had simply destroyed the entire house with Sonic inside? What if Tails hadn't shown up when he did? Would Knuckles have succeeded in his quest to take the hedgehog out? Tom closed his eyes tightly, forcing the horrible images out of his mind. Images of a blue hedgehog lying still on the grass. Images of the boy begging for mercy as the light left his eyes. Images of Sonic calling out for him as things went black. This last one was the hardest to unthink.
Focus, Tom. Focus. The kid's okay. The house can be fixed. Robotnik is gone. Stop playing the what-ifs game. Move forward. Take charge.
He mentally told himself.
Well, we were considering doing some renovations.
Maddie sat behind him, raising her shoulders in a small shrug.
Maybe this is a sign we should.
The sheriff glanced over at her, saying nothing. Maddie always did try to find the bright side in most situations, but right now, it was hard to take. This was so much worse than when Robotnik's drones shot up the place. At least the bullet holes were easy to repair and caused no structural damage. And he hadn't been as attached to the hedgehog at the time either. Right now, that kid was solidly entrenched into his heart. The thought of anything happening to him, especially while he was home alone, was too much for Tom to consider. He would do anything to keep his boy safe. Sonic climbed through the hole in the wall, his large green eyes moving over the rubble. The boy was unusually quiet. Tom hunkered down next to him.
You okay?
The hedgehog nodded.
I didn't. It all happened so fast. I didn't think about it so bad.
We'll fix it.
Tom said, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder.
Don't worry about it. You're okay, and that's what's important.
He glanced over at the echidna in the yard.
Knuckles did all of this?
The hedgehog raised one shoulder in a shrug.
Yes and no. Technically, he punched me and I went through the walls.
The sheriff's eyes widened.
You went through.
I'm okay though. He was strict, Tom. He didn't know Robotnik was bad. He was doing what he thought was right.
Sonic said quickly, glancing over his shoulder at the echidna. The man shook his head. It was a fair point, but the idea of the echidna beating the tar out of Sonic created a strange combination of anger and fear in Tom's mind. Anger that it happened, and fear that might happen again, to any of them. Knuckles was crazy strong.
Are you sure he's safe?
Sonic nodded.
Positive. He's a little hot-headed sometimes and can jump into things without thinking, but his heart's in the right place. He saved me from drowning and helped take down Robotnik in the end.
He turned to look at the boy in question, who looked over the damage with an expression of shame, hugging the Master Emerald to his chest.
He was all alone for a long time. He lost his dad and most of his tribe when he was just a kid. Looking for the Master Emerald was the only thing he focused on for most of his life.
He turned back to Tom.
He has no one else, nowhere to go. He needs us.
Tom studied the blue boy for a moment before looking over at the echidna. The older boy looked down at the Master Emerald in his hands, his shoulders dropping in a sigh. Scary super strength or not, the kid looked lost. The sheriff nodded.
Yeah, he does.
Maddie looked over the damage, sending up a thank you prayer that no one had been seriously injured, or worse, in the battle that created the carnage before her. It was bad, and the idea that this happened when Sonic was home all alone made her heart hurt. The kid must have been so scared. She examined the blast pattern on the ground. A large circular scorch mark burned the earth as though a bomb had struck there. Rings of charred grass radiated out from the center. A few feet from her, Knuckles stared at it for a long moment, before turning away and looking toward a nearby tree. Tire rats dug into the ground not far from the blast point, and she guessed that's where Tails had hit the echidna, where Tails had saved Sonic's life. A chill ran through her. Just how close was Knuckles to killing her boy? She pushed it out of her mind. It wasn't necessarily Knuckles who was to blame for that, was it? Robotnik had tricked the boy, told him lies about Sonic. Knuckles thought he was doing what was necessary to find the emerald. Looking at him now, it did seem that he was remorseful for his role in the whole thing. And he's still just a kid, older than Sonic, but not by much. What had his life been like until now? She watched as the echidna cradled the Master Emerald to him, and an idea flashed. Maddie hurried past Tom and Sonic in what was left of their living room and headed upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. A moment later, she was back, carrying a canvas messenger bag. She walked over to Knuckles and knelt down before him.
Here.
She slid the bag across him, adjusting the buckle to shorten the strap. The boy raised an eyebrow.
What's this?
A much easier way for you to carry that gem.
She held her hands out.
May I?
He looked at her with narrowed eyes, clutching the gem tightly for a few seconds, seemingly deciding if she was trustworthy enough to pass the emerald over. In the end, he nodded slightly and handed it over to her. Maddie took the gem and tucked it into the bag, flipping the top flap over and securing the clips.
There. Now you have your hands back.
Knuckles adjusted the bag across him, finding a comfortable way for it to sit against his side. He looked up the woman and gave her a small smile.
Yes, this is more convenient. Thank you.
He said, dipping his head in a nod. She smiled. Despite what must have been a hard life, the kid had manners.
You're welcome.
A thought suddenly occurred to her, and she looked around before locating the young fox. The boy stood off the edge of the yard, his tails curled around him.
Tails, why are you standing all the way over there?
The kid jumped slightly, the tails that had enveloped him withdrawing. He offered her a shaky smile.
Oh, no reason.
Maddie furrowed her brow and stood to walk over to the little fox. She may have only known Tails for a few short hours, but she knew a look of guilt when she saw one. Tails' heart pounded as the woman came closer. He clutched the straps of his backpack. She was coming over to tell him it was time for him to go. He was sure of it. They'd made a mistake, and based on the damage, it was obvious he couldn't stay. It wouldn't be the first time. Destruction trying to follow him, thanks to the always present chance of his inventions malfunctioning. No matter how thorough he was with his calculations, there was always that possibility. It was understandable that some people just didn't want the level of risk near them. And this damage hadn't even come from a malfunctioning invention. He had caused this destruction through his own actions. Of course they wouldn't want him now. Look at what he'd done. He'd thank her for getting him something to eat and apologize for the trouble before using a ring to go back to his village. He bit his lip as she hunkered down to eye level.
Honey, none of this is your fault.
Tails blinked, That wasn't what he was expecting. After a few seconds, his shock gave way, allowing the guilt to return, and he flung his ears against his head. He pointed at the shattered fence.
That is, and the shed, and the police car that was destroyed. Those are my fault.
She shook her head.
Robotnik is the one responsible for starting all of this.
She said, brushing his hair tops to the side.
You came here to help Sonic and you did. I never thanked you for doing that.
He furrowed his brow. Thank him? His muzzle burned and his tails curled back around him in embarrassment.
You don't have to. Sonic would have eventually figured things out without me.
But he didn't have to, because you were so brave to leave your home and come here to help him. Don't waste another second thinking you did anything wrong. This cannot be replaced. Sonic can't.
She placed a gentle hand on his cheek.
Thank you for saving my boy.
The kid turned a darker red and practically disappeared into the fluff of his tails.
You're welcome.
Came the soft, barely there reply. Maddie smiled and scooped him into her arms as she walked back towards the others.
You are so sweet, little fox boy. I think I'm gonna like having you around.
It took a few seconds for what she said to sink in.
You still want me to stay?
The woman stopped for a second and reached up to push one of his tails away so she could see his face.
Of course, sweetie.
She said. Her voice was so soft and kind, it made him smile.
I can't send you back to that village where they made fun of you, now can I? No, sir. Not for the hero who saved Sonic the Hedgehog.
Tails blinked away tears as he clutched to her shirt. No one had ever said anything like that to him, ever. He turned to bury his face into her shoulder. Maddie gave the fox a quick squeeze as she walked back towards the house. He held fistfuls of her shirt in his hands, and his body shuddered slightly. She made soothing noises as she stroked his head.
Is the fox ill?
Knuckles asked as Maddie neared. She shook her head.
Just a little overwhelmed, I think. It's been a long day.
Had Rachel's wedding really been only yesterday? Seemed like a year had passed since then. She looked up at her husband, who still stood in the ruined living room.
Let's start making some plans.
Yeah, guess we'll be hitting a hotel for a while.
Tom said, hands on his hips. Maddie shrugged.
Honestly, we could probably throw a tarp over the hole and stay here. We'll call that commander and see if he can put a rush on getting things patched up. We are important guardians to 3 intergalactic aliens after all. I would think they'd want to keep us happy.
Tom seemed to think about this.
You know, that's a good idea.
I have those from time to time.
Okay,
Her husband said, clapping his hands together.
let's break it down. We'll need to clean up the worst of the mess and get some large tarps to get this hole patched. I'll run down and turn off the power to the living room and laundry, if the breaker hasn't been tripped already.
He pointed his hands and finger guns towards her.
Do you want to clean or head out for supplies?
I'll do the supply run. Sonic, check the fridge to make sure it still has power so I know if we need to get some fresh food.
I'm on it.
Sonic said and zipped to the kitchen. A second later, he called out.
We're good.
Good.
She sat and turned to the fox in her arms.
Do you want to stay here or come with me?
The boy seemed to think about it for a second before giving her a shy smile.
I'd like to stay with Sonic if that's okay.
Not a problem, little one. Mind the broken glass, all of you.
Maddie told them as she gently dropped him to the ground.
Yes, Mom.
The man responded, heading towards the basement door.
I'm gonna check the breaker.
Tails flew over the mast to join Sonic, who had grabbed a broom and started sweeping up the loose debris.
Madam Wachowski?
She turned to see Knuckles walking towards her.
You can call me Maddie. What's up, big guy?
The Echidna lowered his head for a second, his brow furrowing.
He
started, his hands clutching the strap of the bag slung across him.
What is my task? How shall I help?
Maddie glanced back towards the house where Tom had reappeared. He pulled a trash bag out from the cabinet under the sink and pointed out a few areas to a still sweeping Sonic. Tom said something to Tails and pointed, and the little fox hurried off to retrieve the dustpan. They seemed to have things well under control here. She turned back to Knuckles.
How about you come along with me? I can use the company, and it'll give us a chance to get to know each other.
The boy seemed to consider this before giving her a short nod.
Very well.
Okay then.
Maddie started towards her Subaru when a thought occurred and she turned back towards the house.
Hey, can someone toss me my purse? It's upstairs in the bedroom.
I got it.
Sonic zipped upstairs and was back in front of her before Maddie could blink.
Here you go, Matt.
Thank you, Blue. Let Tom know Knuckles is coming with me. Oh, and I've got my phone if he needs me.
The hedgehog nodded.
Will do.
He zipped back to the cleanup. Maddie looked down at the echidna.
Okay, Red, let's get a move on. We're burning daylight.
Knuckles pushed the car as Maddie placed various items into it. Blue tarps, trash bags, and various cleaning materials lined the bottom of the basket, and she muttered to herself as she tried to anticipate everything they would need to make the house habitable for the time being. The woman had to make many detours to get to this market, a place with a giant orange sign out front that sold many tools. The battle on Main Street had rendered the road useless for vehicles to travel. A tightening had appeared in the echidna's chest. The people of this town had been endangered and their main road destroyed because of him. If he hadn't trusted Robotnik, the man wouldn't have found the Master Emerald. If Robotnik hadn't found the emerald, Main Street would still be intact. On a smaller scale, if he hadn't trusted Robotnik and brought him to Earth in the first place, Sonic's home would still be intact as well. Everything that happened was his fault, because he trusted the wrong person.
Knuckles?
A voice called and he blinked. The woman had said something to him.
What?
He moved around the car to stand closer to her.
My apologies, I was distracted.
So I see.
She said, placing multiple pairs of work gloves into the cart.
I asked if you'd like some different gloves. Maybe ones with fingers so you had a little more dexterity?
He looked down at his mitts and shook his head.
These remind me of my oath to my people, of the trials and hardships I have endured to restore the honor of my tribe.
Oh.
She said, pulling down a few more gloves in different sizes.
Well, I'll have some other gloves on hand in case you change your mind.
Knuckles nodded, his hand moving to the bag against his side. Feeling the hard shape of the emerald beneath the canvas was comforting.
We'll see about getting a safe or something to keep the emerald in so you don't have to carry it around with you everywhere.
She said, hooking her fingers in the wire frame of the cart and pulling it behind her.
I'd bet you'd feel more comfortable if you knew it was secure.
His hand clenched around the emerald, the idea of letting it out of his sight making his heart race.
I will carry it. It is my duty.
He said, his voice sharper than he intended. She stopped, turning to look at him.
It doesn't have to be yours alone, you know. Sonic and Tails promised to help watch over it too, and Tom and I will do whatever we can to help keep it safe.
The echidna cast his eyes to the side. It was hard to accept help, hard to understand he was no longer alone. After spending years on his own, with no one but himself to rely on, the idea of having friends, of trusting anyone else, was so foreign to him. Besides, he barely knew these people. Why should he trust them? And based on his very recent failure, his judgment of people didn't seem to be that good at all. Maybe agreeing to stay was a bad idea. Maddie studied the echidna as he stood with his head lowered, hand clenched tightly to the gem in the bag slung across him. He looked so young, a teenager who had been forced to grow up way too quickly on a quest for his fallen tribe, a quest that was technically over. But now he struggled with what to do with the gem. He so desperately sought. He wasn't used to dealing with others, that much was obvious. Wasn't used to trusting. Now that the adrenaline from the battle had worn off, he was questioning himself, questioning his future. Earning his trust was going to take some effort and time.
Okay, I think we're about done here. Let's go check out. Then I think we'll head across the street to the grocery store.
She said, switching gears to dissipate any unease. Knuckles lifted his head and offered her a questioning glance.
Grocery store?
Yep, I believe I owe you some grapes.
She said, leading them to the registers. As Maddie made her way back to her car after checking out at Home Depot, Tom was getting an earful at home. They had finished sweeping up all the small debris and had moved on to collecting the larger stuff into a single pile. Sonic's helpfulness dwindled as he recounted his latest adventure to Tom. Tails stayed quiet for the most part, preferring to let the hedgehog talk. Sometimes Tom would ask the fox a question, and he would politely respond, but Sonic was practically bursting at the seams to talk about all they'd been through. Besides, the fox kid wasn't as comfortable around Sonic's parents, friends. He wasn't entirely clear on their relationship yet, but he still thought that they had taken him and Knuckles in out of a feeling of obligation, nothing more. They obviously had so much love for Sonic, there was no way he could expect any for himself.
I'm telling you, Donut Lord, this guy is an absolute genius.
Sonic said, pulling Tails to him in a one-armed hug.
He used his gadget to make copies of himself and help us win the dance battle in Siberia.
It was just some backup. You're the one who won.
The hedgehog gave the kid a raised eyebrow.
What are you talking about, Tails? We never would have won if it weren't for you.
We never would have been in trouble in the first place if it weren't for me. My gadget messed up. Some genius I am.
The young boy muttered, squirming his way out of Sonic's grip.
Hey, everyone makes mistakes. It happens. Don't beat yourself up about it, little guy.
Tails said nothing, opting instead to grab a board and fly it over to the trash pile they had started by the ruined shed. He tried not to look at the shed. It poked at the feeling of guilt that hadn't quite gone away. Everything about being here felt wrong. He hadn't had time to think about it during the whirlwind race to find the Master Emerald. But now that everything had settled, reality was sinking in. Sure, it was fun being with Sonic and feeling like they were a team. And yes, if Tails was honest with himself, he hoped they were actual friends too. It was nice hanging around with someone who didn't make fun of him, and a relief to not have to worry if this was some elaborate setup for a cool joke. This had been the happiest Tails had been for a long time. But the fox had to face the truth. Sonic had a home here with these people. They were happy. They had a peaceful life, one that he and Knuckles had destroyed just as thoroughly as they had the shed. He had no right to stay. He had done what he set out to do, help Sonic. The Emerald was safe. Knuckles was no longer a threat, and that crazy robotic guy was gone. Job well done. Time for everyone to return to their previous lives and resume the status quo. Sonic was safe. The hedgehog didn't need him anymore. Why should Tails stay any longer? He'd just get in the way, mess things up. The Wachowskis and Sonic had been happy before this chaos began. What right did he have expecting to be included in such a close-knit little family? A soft hand on his shoulder pulled Tails from his train of thought. He turned to see Tom, hunkered down next to him.
Hey, are you okay?
Tails flickered his eyes behind the man and noticed Sonic was nowhere to be seen.
Where's Sonic?
I sent him off to find some work gloves for me. I wanted to have a minute to talk with you alone.
The fox ears drooped. When adults wanted to talk to him alone, it usually meant he did something wrong, or it was time for this isn't working out talk.
You're so quiet. Now granted, sometimes it's hard to get a word in edgewise with the blue motor mouth around, but still. Is something bothering you?
Tails blinked, his eyes locking with Tom's. The question had startled him, and he couldn't think of the right way to respond. No one had ever asked him that before. No one had ever cared enough to.
I know this is all really weird and different and new to you.
Tom continued, his hand still on the kid's shoulder. He gave a reassuring squeeze.
And right now, you're probably wondering if you even want to stay. It was such a sudden decision, and we sprang it on you without much warning. I get that. And if you eventually decide you'd rather go back to your village, we'll all understand. We can't expect you to give up your life on your home planet and start all over here with a bunch of strangers.
I've watched you.
Tom gave him a questioning look, and the fox continued, flicking his ears back.
Ever since Sonic splashed on the baseball field, I've been watching. Because he was different like me. But he was so much cooler. And he had you guys. I've seen how much you love him. And he loves you. And it's so great. You're a family. I've never had that.
Tom offered the boy a kind smile.
Do you want that?
Tails' eyes burned and he looked away, brows furrowed.
I've tried. It never works out.
Maybe you just never found the right one.
The fox kid closed her eyes tightly. The man sounded so sincere, much like his wife had just a short while ago. Tails wanted to believe. He wanted to hope that this time things would be different, that he wouldn't be turned away again, just because of who he was.
Listen, little guy.
Tom said, resting his hand on the boy's head.
Just give it some time before you make any decisions, okay? I'm not saying we're perfect. I'm not saying that staying with us won't have its bumps. It took us a while to get the hang of taking care of Sonic, and you and Knuckles are hitting us at the same time. It's going to be a bumpy ride until we get our footing and figure out how to deal with this new norm.
The man paused and Tails opened his eyes to see a smile curl at the corner of his mouth.
But I can guarantee you that we will do our best to take care of you and give you a home and a family that you will feel comfortable and safe in.
The words sank into Tails' brain, and he felt that familiar spark of hope blossom in his chest. Maybe this time would be different. He gave Tom a small smile when he noticed a blue figure standing behind the man. Sonic stood a little way back, a smile on his muzzle. The hedgehog gave a small nod of encouragement. Tails smiled wider and gave a small nod back before turning back to Tom.
Okay, I'll give it a shot.
He said, tears licking down his muzzle. The man's smile spread. He gave the fox a quick head rub.
Good, I'm glad to hear that, because I'd really like to hear more about these inventions of yours.
Really?
Absolutely. From what I've seen during our daring escape in Hawaii, you really are some kind of boy genius.
Tom replied, standing. The fox kid's muzzle burned as a blush pushed up through his fur.
Oh, I don't know about that.
I do. Don't sell yourself short, pal. Your brains really saved our bacon a couple times. We really couldn't have one without you.
Sonic said, moving closer. He tossed Tom a pair of work gloves. Tails covered his face with his hands as his namesakes wrapped around him. Emotions swirled through him like a tornado. Embarrassment, gratitude, appreciation, happiness, and hope. He wasn't used to being the center of attention in a positive way.
Nice going, bud. You turned him into a big embarrassed fluff ball.
Who's doing what with my little fox boy?
A voice called and Tails unwrapped himself to see Maddie and Knuckles walking around the house into the backyard. The echidna clutched a bag of grapes while Maddie carried a few grocery bags.
Do I have to knock some heads?
The love of my life has returned from her journey to the market.
Tom said, moving forward to place a kiss on his wife's cheek.
What wonders have you brought, lovely wife?
The house stuff is still in the car.
She said, digging through one of the bags hanging off her arm.
But I stopped by the store for some snackage.
She pulled out a few candy bars and started handing them out.
Kit Kat for Tom and Snickers for Sonic.
Score! Thanks, Mads.
Sonic said, taking the bar.
A Three Musketeers for Knuckles.
She said, handing the echidna the bar. He furrowed his brow and gave her a questioning look.
It's candy. It's sweet and sugary and you'll love it. I promise.
If you say so.
He said and nearly took a bite out of it, wrapper and all, when she grabbed it out of his grasp.
What are you?
Sorry, that's on me. Gotta unwrap it first, kiddo.
She said, pulling the wrapper back and then handed it back to him.
There we go. Try it now.
The echidna gave her an annoyed look, but took a cautious bite. Pleasant surprise spread across his face as he chewed.
I enjoyed this candy.
I thought you might. I wasn't sure what you'd like, Tails, so I picked you up my favorite, a peppermint patty.
Tails took it and gave her an arched eyebrow.
Pepper what?
It's basically chocolate-coated mint.
She pulled the wrapper open for him.
Go ahead, give it a try.
The fox kid gave the candy bar a little sniff before taking an experimental bite. Cool mint flavor hit his tongue, and his eyes shot wide.
It's really good.
Maddie nodded, a smile on her lips.
I thought you'd like it.
She pulled a second one out and ripped the corner open with her teeth.
And one peppermint patty for me.
What other goodies did you get?
Sonic asked, his candy bar already long finished. He dug through the bag and gasped.
Marshmallows? Does that mean...
I figured since we don't really have beds for our new boys,
Maddie said, shrugging.
We could camp out here tonight. We'll get the hole patched up, pitch the tent, and pull the fire pit out for some roasted marshmallows.
You're full of great ideas today, babe.
Tom said, wrapping an arm around his wife's waist. He leaned in for a kiss on her cheek, and she gave a little giggle, bumping him away with her hip.
Come on, Sheriff. Gonna be dark soon. Let's get the hole patched before we lose the light.
She said, giving him a little shove.
Yes, ma'am. Come on, boys. Let's close up the house and have ourselves a little camp out.
Sonic gave a cheer before zipping around the house, and Tails finished his candy bar as he followed. A few hours later, Maddie and Tom sat snuggled up by the dying fire. Fireflies flickered in the dark outside the firelight, and crickets sang. She leaned into him, and he caressed her arm as they watched the last of the logs burn. They had patched the hole in the house as well as they could. It took some doing, as the tarps Maddie had bought weren't quite large enough, but with a little duct tape and some configuring, they had managed. Camping had been a huge hit. Maddie grabbed some hot dogs from the house, and the five roasted them over the fire pit. Knuckle burnt his, but insisted on eating them anyway, as a warrior does not refuse food given in kindness. The group demolished 2 packs of hot dogs before their bellies were sedated. Sonic took great delight in telling his new friends about his various adventures with Donut and Pretzel Lady. The ride-alongs in the police car. Tails flattened his ears at the mention of this, but Maddie pulled him to her and rubbed his back to soothe him. The games of baseball at the Little League field, the trips to Maddie's clinic to visit with litters available for adoption and for checkups. With almost every story, Sonic made sure to add encouragement for Tails and Knuckles, usually on the lines of,
You'll really like it when we do this. Wait until you see that.
Once it got dark, the marshmallows came out. Maddie poked them onto the sticks Tom and Knuckles had found in the forest, and the sheriff showed the new boys how to roast the perfect marshmallow. Knuckles had taken the instructions seriously, his face set with focus and determination to master the technique. Sonic gave constant running commentary on the echidna's attempts, with the occasional helpful tip thrown in. Tails tried to apply precision to his attempts, estimating the correct temperature and cooking time needed for each side, but only ended up losing the marshmallows as they either burst into flames or fell into the fire. Tom finally took pity on the boy and sat with him, showing him how to keep the stick turning and watching for signs that the perfect state of gooey but still firm. Sonic never stopped smiling. He joked and talked, he laughed. The excitement of having friends who were just like him put him in good spirits. Exhaustion finally hit, and the boys had crashed about an hour ago. Tails dropped first, his marshmallow stick dropping until the sugary treat fell into the flames with a soft hiss. Maddie cleaned the sticky mallow mush from his muzzle before carrying him into the tent and tucking him in. They had pulled plenty of pillows and blankets out of the house, and the inside of the tent was cozy and warm. Knuckles followed soon after. He had been sitting cross-legged near the fire pit, the canvas bag containing the Master Emerald nestled in his lap. When his head dropped forward, his chest rose and fell in slow rhythmic patterns. Tom gathered him up, uttering a soft oof when the echidna proved heavier than he looked, and carried him to the tent to get him settled. Knuckles half awoke on the walk, but settled back to sleep quickly with a soft soothing from Tom. Sonic held out the longest, but even he eventually succumbed to the excitement of the day. He managed to get himself into the tent, but before he went, he snuggled up with Tom and Maddie.
Thank you.
For what, bud?
Tom asked, running a hand down the boy's quills.
For everything. Not leaving me, taking in the guys, just being you.
We would do anything for you.
Maddie said, giving his ear a gentle massage. The boy closed his eyes and smiled.
Because we love you.
I love you too.
The boy said, and curled his arms around both of them for a tight squeeze. The adults gave him a hug back before he pulled away.
Good night.
He slumped into the tent, and Maddie could have sworn she heard him snore before he hit the pillows. Now the two of them sat alone, snuggling by the fire. It was the first quiet moment they had since before Rachel's so-called wedding. The events of the day, a blur of action and adrenaline.
Well, so far so good. They seem to enjoy themselves tonight.
Tom said, hugging his wife close.
Yeah, but I think Knuckles is going to have a hard time adjusting. He doesn't seem like he's very comfortable around others and has trust issues.
That doesn't surprise me. I spoke with Tails while you were gone. Sounds like he's never had a family. I think he really wants one, but is afraid we'll reject him like the others he tried.
Oh, that poor baby.
I know.
He went quiet for a moment, resting his cheek on his wife's head.
And this isn't touching on the fact that Sonic just went from one child to middle child in a hot minute, which brings its own issues.
Is no child really that bad?
I think it's just easy to get overlooked. Being the oldest or youngest comes with special attention and privileges, and the middle kid is just kinda stuck between them. And considering both the new kids have emotional issues to deal with, they're gonna need that much more focus and attention as they settle in.
Which could really eat at Sonic now that he's not the center of our worlds anymore.
Bingo.
That's something we're really going to have to keep an eye on then.
Yep. Remember when I said this was a lot?
Yeah?
I hate that I'm right. I just hope it's not too much for us or them.
They sat quietly as the abnormality of the situation sank in. 3 kids, each with their own emotional trauma, and with superpowers on top of everything else. This was going to be a challenge. Soon after, Tom poured water over the remaining embers in the fire pit as Maddie crawled into the tent. The 3 boys huddled together inside, with Tails curled up next to Sonic and Knuckles resting an arm over Sonic's chest. She placed a finger on her lips when Tom crawled in and pointed at the boys. He grinned and pulled his phone out for a picture. The couple snuggled together, listening to the soft snores of the kids next to them. Yes, this would be challenging, but parenthood was always a challenge, and these boys needed them. They would do their best to make sure all 3 felt wanted and loved. With a final kiss, Tom and Maddie fell asleep, ready to face the world as a family of 5 the next day.